Show.
Well, hooray and hallelujah. And welcome to Tom Rhodes Radio Smart Camp. Greetings from another beautiful day in captivity. I'm here in Los Angeles sitting next to my wonderful mother. It's the Mommy and Tommy show. And life has gotten so much easier for us. In the last 2 weeks, we've been going for a walk every day. And we're going up and down the streets in my neighborhood. And this neighborhood's probably, these houses have been there for 100 years. So these plants have been growing for 100 years. And just absolutely unbelievable plant life. We're really enjoying just being outside and feeling the sunshine on our face. So what are your thoughts on all these magnificent streets and walking around the neighborhood, Mom?
It's been great. And I've been taking pictures of the flowers and the plants because there's a lot of desert plants that I'm not familiar with. And so I've been taking pictures for a few days, and then I was thinking, how can, a question came to my mind, how come the desert plants can be in the same bed as these plants that don't even grow in Orlando because of the heat? They're more northern. And so today we just happened to pass by.
So on Beverly Blvd, it's a place called Rolling Greens. And it's a cool old building. I think it might have been like a tire store or a Firestone tire place. It's one of those kind of cool looking old buildings, but they only sell odd looking plants. And I've always thought every time I've been in there and looked in there, like, how does this place make any money?
They're desert plants, a lot.
And now walking around the neighborhood, I see where all those plants are. There's these beautiful desert plants, and they almost look like they'd be in the ocean, under the water. Like some of them look like coral, or
they look like coral.
And then we went in there today because you wanted to ask them this question.
Yeah.
How's it possible for these desert plants to grow next to plants from the East Coast and the Northeast?
The Northeast.
And I thought it was funny what the guy said. He said, the plants here don't follow plant rules. It's funny, like making a picture like we got like a tough biker gang of plants here. Like, we don't follow the regular plant rules.
Yes, he said something like, if it rains for a week, the desert plants can seem to take it, and then it doesn't rain for quite a long time. The other ones seem to take it also. It just seemed pretty odd to me. But, I'm enjoying taking pictures. I've taken a whole bunch of pictures.
Yeah, and I think it's something probably a lot of people are doing right now is they're realizing the beauty within their own homes and the beauty within their own neighborhoods. And I've always loved my neighborhood because it's the center of West Hollywood. But just to look at these absolutely beautiful flowers and plants that I've never seen anywhere before. Do you remember any of the names of them?
Foxglove.
Foxglove, that was one of them.
Was one of them that doesn't grow in Orlando, I think. There were lots of fig trees. My goodness.
I can't believe how many fig trees.
Yes, they were. That was surprising.
Like we saw that one fig tree, I don't know if we talked about it on the last episode, but there was, and it had tons of figs on it, and then a lot of brown dead ones were on the yard was full of these trees, full of these fallen figs, and we both love figs, and you just shook your head and said, that's a sin.
Well, it's like when we first got to Orlando, and there were all these orange groves all around us, and they would just fall to the ground, and people sometimes would not even pick them up. And you'd go to, and I thought, well, then the oranges are going to be cheaper at the stores, but no. When you went to the stores, the prices of the oranges were the same as they were up north, I
remember in Florida, if someone didn't come and spruce up the areas underneath orange trees, if they let the fruit fall, then rats would come.
Oh.
Yeah, so that was, you never want to let them fall. I was sending pictures of the beautiful flowers that we took to my girlfriend, and then she was sending me right back the names of the flowers. And she said there's an app that she's been using called Picture This. and you just put the photo in, and it tells you whatever the thing is.
Wow, all these apps are so new to me. I am not that great at doing this stuff, but I don't really know the names of all these plants, but they were spectacular.
Common foxglove. That's one. And then this other one was so beautiful.
Well, that white plant.
Sweet alyssum. That's what I have on the back porch.
Yeah, that was
on
really
the balcony.
Cool.
This was the one, and it, blue passion flower.
Oh, yes.
And you said it's got little crosses on it.
Yes,
so,
that's why they're called the passion flower.
Yeah, those are absolutely beautiful. So, any other thoughts on walking around the neighborhood?
No, it's really wonderful to just be able to walk and breathe. You know, you got to be thankful for every tiny little thing.
Amen. And so we're going to talk about the documentaries we've watched and the books that we've read. You've been knocking out more books than I have, but let's start with, we watched this BBC, I think it was from 2002, this BBC documentary called The Adventure of English. And it's basically the history of the English language. And I think you took some notes on it. I don't remember that much from it. So
you know, when you think about the history of English, it doesn't sound all that exciting, but there really was some really cool stories about it. And the guy who put the program out knew so much. There was so much information. He just kept spouting off all his words. You know, how English takes words from other languages, like, you know, when they're conquered, or when the commerce, when there's commerce, you take words from that. So he had hundreds of words he threw out there. And when he started the whole English, like on the 5th century from Holland.
Oh yeah, the original English comes from Friesland in the north of Holland. I thought that was really interesting.
That was.
And then there was Scandinavian Viking invaders that came and settled in the central parts of England, and they brought more grunt sounds or whatever.
Well, when they first came, the treasures in England were mostly in the monasteries, and they would take over the monasteries, kill the people, take the treasures. And so it brought education down to hardly anything.
That's what happens when you kill all the educated people.
Well, a couple of times he was saying how English almost died out, and that was sort of surprising. So the Vikings had a lot to do with that, and also when the French came over,
and the French conquered them, and I liked that was a cool section. I think you were alluding to it. Like the guy would start throwing out these words, and then he goes, so like when the French had conquered England, everything was done in French. Business and law. And then he starts saying the words that we get from French, like rendezvous and voyage, and
like 500 words were from just the French cooking, and also in the law they had a lot of French words. It was almost like French was the main language of commerce and everything, and the second one was Latin. Latin was for church and for schools. And then English came as a third, and English almost died out.
Yeah, and then there was the things with the they didn't want the Bible to be in English, and then the first guy it was his life work to put the Bible in English, and then they killed him, made his life miserable, persecuted him, and then the next guy, what was it, Tyndale?
Tyndale was he was a Bible.
So then he finally successfully gets the first English Bible distributed. The other guy had made hand copies and
Yes, everything had to be by hand.
Beautiful handwritten, hand-copied Bibles, and then they were all burned, or most of them were burned,
Yeah.
and the people who were trying to spread the Bible in English.
Well, there was a lot of persecution, religious persecution. And then it was interesting that whenever he would have people speak in Old English, I just could not understand one word. I don't know if you could understand anything.
No, but even now, like if you go to Scotland or in the north of England, sometimes it's like it's hard to imagine that this is the same language. I just can't understand people. And then you and I were talking about how in the movie My Fair Lady, Richard Harris, he plays a linguist, and then he could tell the education and what part of England people were from. And I was telling you that it's kind of still like that. It's remarkable when you're in England and English people know kind of where someone's from, the region, and the level of education they've had just by the way they speak. And
My Fair Lady, in that movie, it really showed the difference.
In America, we
between
don't really
people.
have those distinctions unless someone's like really thick New York, Boston accent or a really thick Southern accent, something like that. Then other than that, the
Yes.
American accent,
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Seattle could
a
sound
lot
like
easier
Kansas
in
City.
America.
Yeah.
But there was so much to this. It just was mind-boggling. But
It was really enjoyable, and it's too bad that we watched that one weeks ago. So
Yeah.
a lot of the facts have left me. But I know the Bible was a big spreader of English.
Yes.
And then Shakespeare was a big spreader of English.
Yes, Shakespeare actually made up some words. There were some words that never made it in the English language, but he made up some words, and then like nobody knew exactly how to spell the words, so he had a lot to do with that. And now when he showed people doing a Shakespeare play, we could understand it, even though it was like old-fashioned. It was understandable. We knew.
Well,
what
I've
was
never been
happening.
able to read Shakespeare because of that old English. It's too irritating for me. I can enjoy seeing a performance or a Shakespeare movie, theatrical interpretations, but anytime I've ever tried to read Shakespeare, I get drowsy.
Well, I could read it. I think I read, Romeo and Juliet. I read a couple of those things that were very interesting. People still perform these things. And he was showing how in England they still perform some of these acts, theaters, in the Old English, which was kind of interesting to see that they still do that in the Old English.
Yeah,
language.
preserving their culture. I'm sure I told you this story, and I'm sure I've said it on the podcast before. But when I had my sitcom on NBC, there was an episode called "Looking for Mrs. Goodbar," and I accidentally had sex with a student's mother the weekend before, like the Friday night before a parent-teacher weekend conference, something like that. And the woman who played the mother that I accidentally had sex with was Wendy Malick. And she was on Just Shoot Me. She's been in tons of things. Brilliant actress. So we were rehearsing that week, and we were in my classroom scene, and Ron Glass was on the other side of the classroom doing a scene with the kids. So the scene would go back and forth to the sides of my classroom. So we were in a break, and Ron Glass with the people on the other side of the room were rehearsing their thing. And we're just sitting there listening, waiting for the scene to come back to us. And Wendy Malick says, "Oh, he has such a wonderful voice. I wonder if he's ever done any of the classics." And I said, "Oh, do you mean that talking to the skull shit?"
Gosh.
And I was referring to Shakespeare. I had belittled all of Shakespeare's work
Oh, that's so bad.
as that talking to the skull shit. And I had this conversation with...
There was a lot more to it than that.
Well, I mean, it's one of the stupidest things that's ever come out of my mouth, because I had Stephen Tobolowsky on the podcast, and, you know, he's remained a good friend of mine. And he pointed out to me that scene comes from Hamlet. Hamlet is talking to the skull of a comedian, a guy named Rorik. And he's saying that he remembers when, you know, he can't believe this guy who made him laugh when he was young and when he was a kid, and just how much he loved this guy because he was so funny, and that he would set the table a-roar with laughter. So the fact that I didn't know the skull in Shakespeare was of a comedian.
It's pretty bad.
One of the, you know, I mean, you know, in the course of your life, you say like a lot of stupid jackass shit, but...
Yes, you wish you could take it
that
back.
That one is in the top 10 stupidest
well.
things I've ever said.
Well, coming back to this English language thing, there were two stories that I thought were really great. That Jefferson, when he was president,
Thomas Jefferson
wanted Lewis and Clark to keep a detailed record, like a daily record of their travels, and
the expedition.
Yes, and so they did, and they did it in the frontier English. So
more kind of like
that was
the rough country speak of wherever they were. Well, but no one spoke English. It was just the men that were on the expedition.
Well, yeah. So you know, so that was very interesting.
He didn't want it in really overly scholarly language.
Oh, it was on their language, you know, like the frontier kind of speech. And there was another story that he said that was really impactful. You know, the Indians and the first colonies in New England.
Oh, you're talking about Squanto.
Squanto,
now, this is
yes.
the best story from the whole thing.
Yes.
That just absolutely blew our minds. So
Yes.
when the pilgrims came over on the Mayflower from England, and they landed on Plymouth Rock in what is now Plymouth, Massachusetts, and there's a statue of Squanto. So I've got the Wikipedia page open.
Okay,
Should I just... So the man's name was actually Squantum, but English people just shortened it to Squanto because we're sassy like that. Squanto was a member of the Patuxet tribe, best known for being an early liaison between the Indian population in southern New England and the Mayflower Pilgrims, who made their settlement at the site of Squanto's former summer village. The Patuxet tribe had lived on the western coast of Cape Cod, Massachusetts, but they were wiped out by an epidemic infection. Here's his story that we found so fascinating. That was in, and we never knew this, you know.
Yeah.
And you think this would be a story that every American would know.
It would tell you in the history
the name Squanto would be
Right.
revered throughout the history of our country. Squanto was kidnapped by an English explorer, Thomas Hunt, who carried him to Spain, where he sold him in the city of Malaga. He was among a number of captives bought by local monks who focused on their education and evangelization. Squanto eventually traveled to England, then returned to America in 1619 to his native village, only to find that his tribe had been wiped out by an epidemic infection. Squanto was the last of the Patuxets.
Yes, and I wondered whether the last of the Mohicans story was...
That's not the last of the Mohicans.
No, I know, but I wondered if that wasn't taken from this.
Well, that's not the same story, because this guy, which I'm going to read, doesn't happen in The Last of the Mohicans.
Yeah.
The Last of the Mohicans he's being...
Well, I don't know
He's
if-
not helping the English. He's
Yeah.
being hunted to death by the English. I mean, he's helpful, but this is a completely different story.
Sorry, hon.
The Mayflower landed in Cape Cod in 1620, and Squanto worked to broker peaceable relations between the Pilgrims and the local Pawcatuckets, however you pronounce it. He played a key role in the early meetings in March 1621, partly because he spoke English. That's the thing that blows our mind. So
Yes.
he's kidnapped by this English sailor, and he learns English, and then he's sold to the monks in Malaga, Spain, where he also gets a further education.
Right.
And then he goes back to England, and then he goes back to where he started from. So then here's the pilgrims coming from England, and they're scared shitless. They don't know what these native people are about.
Right.
Are they going to kill them? Are they going to welcome them? And winter's coming on, and they don't know how to farm. They don't know how to fish. They don't know how to feed themselves.
Well, they had a hard winter.
Or survive through winter.
A lot of them died.
And then here comes this Native American guy, steps out of the woods, and he speaks English.
Yes, that was unbelievable, because what I learned in school was that the Indians, like you picture a whole group of Indians coming and helping them survive that winter. But it wasn't true. It was just this one person.
Yeah, everybody knows that the Thanksgiving image of them sitting down with the Indians.
Yeah, and it was just one person who...
mythology.
Who helped them, talk to the other tribes. So he was like an in-between person. So when you hear the history of what you hear in school, and then when you find out what really happened, it's kind of upsetting. I mean, I feel like, wow, all this time we were sort of misled into thinking a whole group. And this guy had a giant history of, being kidnapped, taken to another country that he couldn't communicate with them. He had to learn Spanish. Then he had to go to England, and then he had to come back and find out that all his people were dead. And he helped the
pilgrims.
Pilgrims.
He told them, he taught them what plants to plant and how to survive through the winter.
So now they did erect a statue to him.
It's in Plymouth, Massachusetts.
In Plymouth, Massachusetts. But it's like, why can't we get the full story from our
He should be on our money or something,
Oh, in our history and our... why can't we get the full story? Because the real story is way more interesting than a bunch of Indians came and helped them. I was always picturing a group of Indians, which, maybe it's not.
I think there was one meal where everyone sat down. That we kind of get that from, but I mean, it's just largely mythology.
Maybe the whole they did give thanks, which they should have. But,
the main story is that the pilgrims who settled this country never would have survived that first winter if it wasn't for this English-speaking Indian Squanto.
Right.
And his name is largely lost to history.
Yeah, and why don't we know this? That's a shame.
It's a pity. Was there anything else from this English language?
There was so much you could hardly think. There was an awful lot.
So the next one we watched was the PBS Ken Burns documentary on Mark Twain. And, a lot of Mark Twain's books, speaking of, like, strange English, like the Tom Sawyer book, I find that hard to read because he's writing that in, like, vernacular, kind of phonetic English, the way people, would speak with Southern accents instead of the proper English. What I find the most fascinating is the life story of Mark Twain.
Yes, he was a very interesting person, and the ones who were trying to talk about his life story can't put together this guy who's so different in a way. So what they say is like he was two people. Like Samuel Clemens, as Samuel Clemens, he was this kind of a person, and as Mark Twain, he was that kind of a person. So it's like he was two different kind of people, and it's fascinating to hear what they have to say in the documentaries about him. And you read his books, like the book that I read on. His book that he wrote and didn't want people to know it was him was a fantastic book.
The Joan of Arc book.
The Joan of Arc book was Oh, it was so well written. He just made it come alive. I was kind of amazed and really taken. I just thought it was a wonderful book and so well written. And it was him that did it. And he didn't even want people to know that he had written it because he thought that people would expect it to be funny. And it wasn't a funny book. But it was a great book. I really enjoyed it.
From the biographies that I've read, that he thought that was going to be his greatest work.
Well, I
was the
thought
Joan
it
of
was.
Arc book, and you know we're gonna get to some of the books that you've read in a minute, but perfect timing. You started reading this book that my friend Jack Bulware gave me. Jack runs. He's the co-founder of Litquake, the oldest literary festival in San Francisco. And he had this writer who wrote this book come and speak at Litquake a few years ago. So Jack gave me a copy of the book, and it's called The Bohemians by Ben Tarnoff, Mark Twain and the San Francisco Writers Who Reinvented American Literature. And, you know, Mark Twain started out, you know, on the riverboats, and then his brother got a job as like the secretary governor of Nevada or something like that. So then he goes to Carson City, and he's working for a newspaper there, and it's wild and it's rough. And then he goes and lives in San Francisco, where he's writing for a newspaper. And I was telling you that period when he lived in San Francisco is kind of always breezed over whenever they're talking about the life of Mark Twain. So that's why I think it's really fascinating, or really cool that you're reading this book right now.
Well, I'm not finished with the book. It's really fascinating about all these writers who changed the American literature. And it was a very wild place. People in San Francisco were mostly young men that came there to get rich, you know, with the gold rush, and then get their money and go somewhere else. And it was wild, a very wild place.
Saloons and prostitutes,
The whole
and
bit.
and then you said that these writers would make up tall tales on their stories.
Yes, and that was
stuff.
part of the thing. So Mark Twain was really good at making up stories, and he made up a story about some guy who had killed his wife by smashing her head in with an axe and killed his children. 6 of the children and all this. It was a gory story. And the very next day, he retracted it, you know, that he had made it up. It was a hoax. Well, people didn't take too kindly to that. And what he was in Virginia City, in
Virginia
Arizona.
City, that's it.
Yeah.
Not Carson City, Virginia City,
In
Nevada.
Nevada. He did another hoax that did not go over well, and he almost had to, he also had this fight with another guy, another newspaper person, and he challenged him to a duel, which was against the law in Arizona at the time, and so he actually had to leave Arizona. Anyway, it's really pretty interesting that Mark Twain also went out trying to do gold mining. He did an awful lot of different things. And they do breeze over this part of his life, which I would like to find out more about by finishing this book, which I haven't yet. But
Cool, and this is a book that I've been wanting to read. I've got
it's a really nice
so
book.
many backed up. But I've always thought, and I've always said, that Mark Twain invented stand-up comedy. And that's why I've always referred to San Francisco as the Jerusalem of stand-up comedy. So you're reading this book, and you go, well, hey, take a look at this. On November, and I think I've always thought that Mark Twain invented stand-up comedy on October 2nd, 1866, when he gave this lecture on the Sandwich Islands, which we now call Hawaii, in San Francisco. And there's a famous poster for it where he wrote, you know, all these funny things would be happening down the street. And
it's in there.
yeah, but here's the thing you had me read. On November 8th, 1863, That's before 1866, isn't it? On November 8th, 1863, the country's most famous comedian came to San Francisco. He called himself Artemus Ward and counted Abraham Lincoln among his many fans. When the president presented the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation to his cabinet in 1862, he prefaced it by reading one of Ward's sketches aloud, presumably to lighten the mood before changing the course of American history forever. Artemus Ward was the pseudonym of Charles Farrar Brown, a typesetter from Maine who became America's first stand-up comic. A best-selling author, he built a booming career on the lecture circuit, bringing loud laughter from a nation that sorely needed comic relief. Wow. So, okay, Artemus Ward.
Well, books teach us.
It's great when your mom can teach you stuff.
Well, you can't take everything, but I'm thinking that probably is true.
I think
until proven otherwise.
I think Cliff Nesterhoff told me that when he wrote the book The Comedians. But yeah, wow. So I'll have to look more. I'll have to dive into to more Artemus Ward. Any other thoughts on Mark Twain?
He was a really.
You thought he was kind of you thought he might have been kind of an asshole.
Yeah. Well, he kind of. Well, they kind of even said that in the documentary, that everything had to be about him. That and they even showed a little clip on when his daughter got married.
He wore his graduation outfit to kind of upstage her and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, really, if everything had to be about you.
Yeah. Well, there was one time at the house in Hartford, Connecticut, where the shirts were a little off, and
a button was off or something simple like that. He threw his shirts out that second-story window. I mean, really.
Well, it's funny. I always liked everybody loves the Beatles, and I always liked John Lennon the most because he seemed the most outspoken. And then, the more you learn about John Lennon, he probably wouldn't have been that nice to be friends with. He was kind of like crotchety asshole most of the time.
Well,
so maybe Mark Twain was kind of a crotchety asshole most of the time.
I think he probably was a difficult husband.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, it's not taking away anything from his genius. He was a great writer.
Yeah, I love Mark Twain.
Yeah.
There's many crotchety assholes that I'm
that are admirable in other ways.
that are pretty skilled at whatever their endeavor is. And then the next documentary that we've been watching and totally loving it. We started this like 3 days ago. We've been watching Ken Burns' country music documentary.
Yes.
And
well, every time they say a record, and you say, "I've got it," and there it is.
I've got that. Yeah.
Yeah, you've got all these vinyl records, and it's kind of an amazing collection.
Yeah, and it's cool, as we're watching the country music documentary. The next day, I'll play the vinyl records of the people that they talked about.
Yeah.
So the documentary starts out, the first big country music star was Jimmie Rodgers. And he's done a lot of songs, and his story's incredible. He was from Meridian, Mississippi, and then he was in a band. I think he was living in Virginia. And then there was this mobile music recording guy who had set up he was recording people in Bristol, Tennessee. And Jimmie Rodgers heard about it, and he went there with his buddies. He had a band. And then the night before, they get into an argument. They said that he couldn't play guitar, and one guy was pissed.
Isn't that amazing?
His band breaks up the night before they're going to record. And he decides he's going to go in and record by himself. Uh-huh. And I love the story of Robert Johnson so much, where in 1936 he goes in and, he records in a hotel room in San Antonio, Texas. This is like that story, but for country music. So he goes in and he records like 2 songs, and one of them becomes like a huge hit. And then he was a brakeman on the railroad lines. He had a tough life. He had contracted tuberculosis.
Yes.
So he was really skinny and ill for most of his life. But the people went nuts for Jimmie Rodgers songs. And there's a Jimmie Rodgers song that I love, and it says, he says, I'd rather drink muddy water and sleep in a hollow log. I'd rather drink muddy water and sleep in a hollow log than to stay in Atlanta and be treated like a dirty dog. Well, it's T for Texas, T for Tennessee. T for Texas, T for Tennessee. T for Thelma, the girl who made a fool out of me. That's a Jimmie Rodgers song. And I've heard it's on the Bob Dylan, Johnny Cash album that I've been playing a lot. I've heard I've heard live bands in Texas play that song. And then, so he was recording in the 20s and then the early 30s, and Bonnie and Clyde. So the common thing, people love Jimmie Rodgers so much, they would go into grocery stores back then and they'd say, give me a pound of butter, a dozen eggs, and the latest Jimmie Rodgers records. And then they said that when Bonnie and Clyde were on their bank robbing spree, Bonnie would slip into the stores and buy up all the Jimmie Rodgers records.
They used part of their money they stole to buy these records.
Jimmie Rodgers records.
Wow.
That
that kind of blows you away.
Blows me away. So, where are my notes? Coping with loss has been one of its predominant themes, country music. I forget who. And then they talked about. Oh, wow, that's the story that I love. the Carter family.
Yes.
And they also recorded on that first Bristol, Tennessee recording session. So the husband, AP, he wanted them to do it. It was his wife, Sarah, and then his sister, Maybelle.
I think it was her sister.
Were they sisters, or we'll have to look.
It was her sister, I'm pretty sure.
Because AP was out and he left her to do the work on the farm and raise the kids.
Well, he was out, but he was out trying to get new songs.
He's driving around the countryside in the mountains with a black guy who helped him collect all these country songs because they wanted to record everything they could. And then while he was away once, there was I think the cousin's name was Coy, and he was there for a couple of months, and he was a young, good-looking guy. Him and Sarah fall in love. And then it was great tension in the family, so his family moved them all to California. And she wrote him letters, but her mom kept the letters, his mom kept the letters, and he never saw them and knew that he righted her. So the Carter family blows up, and they're massive at the same time that Jimmie Rodgers is massive. And there was this quack doctor who thought that men who had lost their sex drive could get it back by having goat testicles or goat glands inserted into men.
Yeah.
The guy made a horrible quack doctor,
made $1 million.
But he loved country music, and at the time, Chicago and Nashville and Dallas, there was just a few places that had large enough antennas to reach big places. So he spent $500,000 on this massive radio antenna that would reach most of the United States, and it was right across the border of Texas and Mexico.
Yes.
So he hires and this is during the Great Depression. Mm-hmm. Everybody's broke. And he hires Maybelle and Sarah and AP Carter. I think it was $4,000 each, which was like 3 times the annual, salary for people then. And they're living on this border town in Mexico, and they're playing music every day because there wasn't too many records then. It was mostly live performances on the radio. And she steps up to the microphone, and she's miserable. They're separated, her and her husband, AP.
Nobody knows that they're separated.
Nobody knows. When they would play live, it would say the Carter family presenting a good moral show, something like that. They would be presenting a moral program. So she steps up to the microphone and she says, I want to dedicate this song to Coy in California. And all those 1930 songs sound sound the same. She goes, "Tonight I am thinking of my blue eyes. I wonder if he ever thinks of me." He's listening with his family, and then he said to his family, I'm driving to Texas. I'm going to get Sarah. And then they ended up together.
Yeah.
And like, people thought that the Carter family was this good, wholesome act, and all of this was kept secret because it would have been a massive scandal.
Definitely.
And then who else did they talk about? Gene Autry. You said you liked Gene Autry.
Yes.
Home on the range where the deer and the antelope play.
Yeah, and then they said that Roy Rogers, Gene Autry had not a fight exactly, an
a labor
argument.
dispute. He's making these movies, and it was funny. He had a radio show, Gene Autry, and he's the singing cowboy. He was the first singing cowboy, and then all these people copied him afterwards. And it was they had funny clips of these movies. So he's a singing cowboy, and he has a radio show. But then he would go fight aliens and space people.
It was so
and he's got his little cowboy outfit, and he's fighting aliens and robots.
It was a really low budget.
Very low budget. And then he goes back, and then he would sing. At the end of the movie, he makes it just in time to his radio show to sing the songs, and they were low budget, but these movies made a ton of money, and he wanted more money.
I remember seeing them every Saturday.
And the movie studio just got rid of him and hired another guy, Roy Rogers.
Roy Rogers, jeez. And
so I didn't know Roy Rogers was like kind of a scab, kind of.
Not a scab. He was a backup. He was his replacement. I had no idea he was his replacement. I like Roy Rogers also.
You remember seeing those movies?
Yes. Every Saturday we'd go to the movies and see these movies. Both Roy Rogers and Gene Autry. But it was... then he came back. I guess they... solved their difficulties, and so he came back. But they were pretty good movies, you know.
Yeah, then he came back, and then there was all these other singing cowboy movies and all these people. And I think that's why they started calling it country and western music, because then these western guys...
And they kind of breezed over Roy Rogers. They hardly mentioned him at all. But I liked them both. I mean, I thought they were both pretty big.
Yeah, then there was the story of Ernest Tubb, remember? So Ernest Tubb loved Jimmie Rodgers. And he's, in 1936, he traveled with Mrs. Jimmie Rodgers. They did little theaters in South Texas, and she let him play Jimmie Rodgers' Martin guitar. The guitar that Jimmie Rodgers himself... And so they showed like the marquees in these movie theaters, and it was Mrs. Jimmie Rodgers and Ernest Tubb playing Jimmie Rodgers' actual guitar. Like, people were like still such fans of Jimmie Rodgers. That was interesting. Thanks. Yeah, and it said thanks on the back of his guitar. Ernest Tubb. But that, and I've seen this famous picture of Ernest Tubb where he's holding the guitar at the end of a concert. He flips the guitar and it said thanks. That was Jimmie Rodgers, who originally had thanks on the back of his guitar. And then, my favorite, Hank Williams comes on the picture. And Hank Williams had his first guitar at 8 years old. And he's living in Montgomery, Alabama. And it was a black street musician named Rufus Payne who taught Hank Williams how to play guitar. And he said there's nobody... he said everything he learned from music, he learned from Rufus Payne. And then he's doing these like high school gigs and bar gigs and beer hall gigs, and fights would happen, and sometimes people would want to fight Hank Williams. This is when he was really young. His mother went with him to all the gigs. She'd take the money, and then she would even act as bouncer sometimes. And sometimes, big fights broke out. And Hank Williams said, there's nobody I'd rather have with me in a beer hall brawl than my mother standing next to me with a broken beer bottle in her hand.
She looked kind of rough. She was a little rough.
I just love that picture of Hank Williams' mom with a broken beer bottle in her hand. They called Hank Williams the Hillbilly Shakespeare. That was beautiful. And then at the end of his life, you know, it was his wife Audrey. They got divorced, then they got back together, and then they got divorced again. And he was completely in the toilet. He had back problems. He's drunk. He's on drugs. He's missing gigs.
It was pretty pitiful.
And then at the end of his life, he was at a show in El Paso, and they asked Minnie Pearl to sit with him backstage, so he wouldn't miss the second show. And you know, he's drunk. He's on pills. He's completely wiped out of it. And she's trying to cheer him up. So she's singing him "I Saw the Light," which he wrote, which is, I think, one of the greatest.
I loved all his songs. I knew when you were playing his songs, I knew all the words.
That's nice.
I knew all the songs.
That's nice when I played the Hank Williams records.
Yes,
you could sing along with it.
That was really
I saw
good.
the light, I saw the light, no more darkness, no more night. Now I'm so happy, no sorrow inside. Praise the Lord, I saw the light. So Minnie Pearl's singing "I Saw the Light" to him backstage in El Paso, and he said, "Minnie, there ain't no light."
Yeah.
And that's when they kind of knew he was a goner.
Well, he didn't seem to have anything to live for.
Yeah, and then can we unveil the big secret about Minnie Pearl?
Oh, goodness.
Minnie Pearl was at the Grand Ole Opry forever, and she wore these hats with a price tag on it, and she was Cousin Minnie Pearl, and she was just the most country redneck. Well, it turns out she's from kind of a wealthy family. She had been well educated, college graduate, even went to theater school and studied Shakespeare. You know what that talking to the skull shit?
Yeah.
Minnie Pearl was an expert at it. So and she was nervous that people would find out that she was doing a character. So she wasn't a dumb hick. She was doing a character, and she was one of the most beloved people in America from the Grand Ole Opry.
Yes.
And I like the story they told the first time she did the Grand Ole Opry. She's backstage and she's nervous and she's, you know, worried that the people might see through her act and see that, you know, it's a character she's doing. And the guy who ran the Grand Ole Opry, what did he say? He said, "Just go out there and love them, honey, and they'll love you right back." I think that's pretty great advice for anybody going on the stage.
Right.
Just love them, honey, and they'll love you right back.
And she lasted many years.
She was around forever. And, and then Johnny Cash, he was living in Memphis, and he's walking around, and there was a black guy named Gus Cannon playing guitar on his front porch. And then Johnny would sit with the guy, and that's when Johnny was learning how to play guitar. I liked all throughout this country music thing that they keep showing how the music goes back and forth from the black community doing white songs that came, a lot of the old standards, like that came from England, Ireland, and Scotland. Like there's a song called Barbara Allen that goes back to like 1642. And, black acts would do that in their show, and then the white acts would take black songs. And I liked it all throughout.
The music went back and forth.
The country music history that, you know, there's kind of no racial barrier. It's only when the upper crust elites in charge have any say that the people are separated and segregated, you know?
That was the cool part about country music.
Well, I like that you were, you came to the United States in 1950, and you said that in America, that's all anybody listened to was country music.
That's all I listened to.
Yes,
and I thought, well, what happened? When did I stop listening to this music? And
I said, Elvis Presley.
That was right.
And then the country music documentary shows that
that's
is basically exactly what happened.
Exactly what happened.
And then they showed Elvis had done Blue Moon of Kentucky, this famous Bill Monroe song, and Elvis blows up in 1956, and he came to the Grand Ole Opry to do Blue Moon of Kentucky, and they said that the audience was polite at best.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Yeah,
Good
coming
for
out there
him.
and shaking his hips like a black guy.
Well, it was one cool part that they showed was Elvis Presley and
Carl Perkins?
no, I'm sorry, honey, Johnny Cash.
Yeah.
And then they were. They traveled together and did songs. But what I thought the coolest part was Johnny Cash imitating Elvis Presley. They showed that, and I just rolled on the floor.
It was hilarious. Johnny Cash, he messes his hair up so his bangs are dangling, and then he put the guitar.
His guitar around.
He's gyrating his hips like Elvis.
Oh goodness! It was so funny. It was so funny.
That is really funny.
It was so funny.
You got to see this documentary, or I'm sure that clip of Johnny Cash
That's worth
imitating Elvis is on YouTube somewhere. But so Johnny Cash was in Germany for 3 years in the army, and I know that that's where Johnny Cash wrote Folsom Prison Blues. Because I in the biography of Johnny Cash that you read, I remember when I read that he said that when he wrote the line, I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die.
Yeah.
He said he was trying to think of the worst reason you could kill a man was just to watch him die.
That's pretty horrible.
That's pretty horrible. So Johnny Cash, Elvis, and Carl Perkins are friends, and they're all living in Memphis and starting to record songs for Sun Records. And they're having lunch one day, and Johnny Cash told the story about this guy that he was with in the army in Germany. And the guy used to like to dress all spiffy. And that the guy would say, don't step on my blue suede shoes. And Carl Perkins took that story and wrote the song Blue Suede Shoes. And he had a medium-sized hit with it. And then Elvis did it, and it's
major.
One of the biggest earth-shattering number one singles of all time.
And years after that, I saw a pair of blue suede shoes in a shoe store, and I bought them. It was kind of weird.
How did you feel when you wore the blue suede shoes?
It was kind of weird wearing that, but I wore them for a while.
I'd love to have some blue suede shoes myself. Yeah, and then Johnny Cash was married. And here's a story that, now I learned about Artemus Ward being the first stand-up comedian in America. I had always thought that I had heard that June Carter Cash wrote the song "I Walk the Line" about and it's kind of it's about remaining loyal to your spouse or your lover. But it turns out June Carter Cash wrote Ring of Fire later. Johnny Cash wrote I Walk the Line for his first wife Vivian, and they had 4 daughters.
Yes.
And because she was worried that he would be tempted by all these women on the road.
Right.
And he told one of his bandmates, as a man, I walk the line, saying that he was faithful to his wife. Well, and then there came one point where he stopped walking the line and was really screwing around, and then he gets involved with June Carter Cash. And then there's the story of they played at the Hollywood Bowl, and his wife Vivian was
Pretty
there
horrible.
with the kids waiting. And after the show, Johnny Cash jumps into a limousine with June Carter
and leaves his wife and children sitting there.
just standing there
That was
at the Hollywood Bowl.
That was pretty low.
Pretty low.
And they just breeze over. Both of them were married to other people. June Carter was also married to someone else, and they never mentioned her husband. And I just wonder, the poor guy must have had a hard time also, and they never mentioned him, and just barely breezed over Johnny Cash's wife.
Yeah, and then she, her mother was Maybelle Carter, and she's such an important woman in country music because they were saying that Hank Williams would go talk to her when he was having marital problems
right.
and drinking and drug problems, and she really nursed him. And that when Johnny Cash was a total fuck up, he's on drugs and he kicked out the front lights at the Grand Ole Opry at the Ryman Auditorium. They fired him. And so she would say to June, I don't want to lose Johnny Cash like we lost Hank. And she tried to help them. And there was a story I forgot to mention about the Carter family when it's during the Depression and they're making money. And Maybelle Carter and Sarah Carter both bought Harley-Davidson motorcycles.
Yes.
I just think that's so cool. During the Great Depression, here are these two badass, super important women in music, American history, and they're ripping around the mountains
in a motorcycle.
In motorcycles.
That's cool.
That's so friggin' cool. So, any other thoughts on Johnny Cash?
No, I love his music.
I love his music too.
Don't think he treated his first wife too well. But,
yeah.
But hey.
But him and June.
She was the reason he got himself together. And her family helped also. So that was good. We all make mistakes.
So then we're moving on to Willie Nelson. He was playing... He's from Texas and he's living in Nashville trying to sell his songs. And he sold a couple of his songs for like $200. And they ended up being massive hits.
Yeah. That was...
And then he was going to sell this other song to Fair and Young for $500. And Fair and Young said, why don't I loan you $500 and you keep the rights to it.
Yeah.
And that song, I think it was Stardust. I'm not sure which song it was. But that song becomes a massive hit. And Willie Nelson got his first royalty check from it. And he came into the bar where Fair and Young was and he kissed him on the mouth. And Fair and Young said that he had never been kissed so lovingly in his life as he had been by Willie Nelson. And Willie Nelson was struggling so hard up to that point. He said that he had hocked his guitar so many times, the guy at the pawn shop could play it better than he could.
That was funny. It was a great documentary.
Great documentary. Patsy Cline.
Oh, goodness.
She's in a car accident. And Loretta Lynn. Ernest Tubb has got this record store in Nashville. That's where I bought a few of these old country records there. And he had a Friday night radio show that was live on the air. And Loretta Lynn came and sang I Fall to Pieces on the radio. And Patsy Cline was listening from the hospital and sent her husband to go get this girl and bring her back to the hospital. And then they were friends ever since then.
There were so many good stories.
So many great stories. Roger Miller was a bellhop at the Andrew Jackson Hotel. Then he had a hit with the song King of the Road. And whenever he came to Nashville, he would stay in the best suite at the Andrew Jackson Hotel, where he had once been a bellhop.
Wow, that's really cool.
That was pretty cool. Buck Owens, Loretta Lynn, Charlie Pride. That's basically where we're at now. I love the story of Charlie Pride that, he was the first black country music superstar. Mm-hmm. And that when the label sent his music out to the record stations, they didn't include a picture because the stations wouldn't know. He had such a pure country voice.
He had a great voice. Yeah.
Then it leaves off with there was a great story with the Charlie Pride thing. I think they said he said there's truth in the music and the art tells the story of us coming together, meaning blacks and whites, better than our actual history. Mm-hmm. The music tells the story of us coming together. The
music was the influence, really.
And then the last thing, Dolly Parton, she was from whatever back, I forget the name of where she's from in the mountains of Tennessee by Knoxville. When she
Really
was
great.
born,
Yeah.
the doctor who delivered Dolly Parton was paid with a sack of flour. And Dolly Parton was the first person in her family to graduate from high school.
Yes.
And then when she was a little girl, she was on a TV show in Knoxville, Tennessee, and her family didn't even have a television.
So they couldn't see her.
So she was the first person ever to buy a television for the family.
And I thought it was interesting about how they treated women. You want to?
Oh yeah, thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she first, and Dolly Parton, God, she's been beautiful her whole life and voluptuous, and she was on the Porter Wagner show, and Porter Wagner thought she would just be happy being, this female who got to sing a song. He didn't realize that she was a strong-minded, strong-willed woman who had a career path and a game plan, and that she wasn't just going to do what
everybody else wanted her to do.
Other people wanted her to do. So they showed this little clip of Porter Wagner introducing her and these other women, Jeannie somebody, and then Connie Smith, these women I'd never heard of. They showed a montage of Porter Wagner intros and other country music shows.
Yes, and they always
and they would always introduce the woman as this little girl. We get Brown coming out here right now as a little girl.
Yeah.
And like the woman's like 35, and she's being introduced as. It just kind of reminded me of the old South when they would call a black man boy. It's just like so demeaning, and like so to call a grown woman who's worked her ass off with her talent to make it to be on television, you're going to introduce her as a little girl?
Well, like she wasn't all that important. Like a token little kid, the token woman in the show. It was a little upsetting to see that. But, we went on from there.
Yeah, we've, thank God we've moved on somewhat.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we've just got a couple books left to talk about. I'll kick it off. Elena, who became a Golden Buddha a couple weeks ago, wrote me and said how much she loved the book Satori in Paris by Jack Kerouac. And Jack Kerouac was hugely influential on my life. I moved to San Francisco in my early 20s because I loved Kerouac and On the Road so much. And I read most of my Kerouac books when I was in my 20s. I love On the Road. I know you read that and you weren't crazy about that. I know a lot of women who have read it thought it was just, more of a guy's book. And then the other book by Kerouac I love is called Desolation Angels. And Satori in Paris is cool. It's a really thin book, and I've read this over the past week. Those big fat son-of-a gun Bretons waddle around as though the last whore of summer were looking for her first lay. There's a quote. So he goes to France, and he's trying to look up the history of his family name. And he's 53 years old in this book, which is how old I am now. And it's just funny because, like, he's drinking. The book starts out, he's hanging out in hooker bars in Paris. And then he's there to research his family name and history, and he goes to Brittany and Normandy, and he's very proud French Quebec guy. The best thing about Kerouac is the joy and enthusiasm in his writing, in the words, and like his spirit of life and the way he looks at the world, kind of like with innocent eyes. But it did make me think that I'm glad I'm 53 years old and I'm not still drinking and hanging out in bars and stuff. But it was a great quick read. Thanks for the suggestion. And as I'm working on my book of my best travel stories, it's just great to hear that upbeat tone in the Kerouac words. So let me see, anything else? A few highlights. Methinks women love me, and then they realize I'm drunk for all the world, and this makes them realize I can't concentrate on them alone for long. Makes them jealous. and I'm a fool in love with God. Yes. Yeah, Kerouac, very, anyway. Good, Mom. We got so we got just a couple books that you've knocked out. Should we do this book first or the purple?
Oh, well, this might take a minute or two.
Okay, sure. Well, my mom's been reading. She read this book. It's called My Israel Trail, and it's by Ari Green. And when I did in December 2018, when I did this Israel tour, I was going through my divorce, and I brought my mom with me on this tour, and she. The guy wrote this book after he was going through his divorce. He hiked all over Israel, and he came up to me, and I was talking about my divorce on stage, and he said, I got divorced not long ago, and I wrote a book about my experience. And he went to the car and he got the book, and I actually haven't read the book, and you remembered we had a very pleasant experience in meeting the guy. So when you saw the book on my shelf, you...
Well, I remembered that I started the book then, but it was at the end of our trip, and so I didn't get to finish it. And really, he was giving you the book, and of course he put to Tom and his mother.
Yeah, and that was...
that was really nice of him. But, it was your book, and so I only read a little bit. Well, I read some, and I was trying to finish it, but, I only had a few days, and so we were doing so much sightseeing and stuff that when here we are, and having so much more time, I remembered that I had started that book, and I would have liked to have finished it because it was a pretty good book, and I love this book. It's My Israel Trail, Finding Peace in the Promised Land, and it's a very spiritual book, and it talks about so many different questions that we might all have. This guy, Mr. Green, says that he's an American Israeli, traditional, liberal, observant, mystical, Halitic, feminist, Zionist, male, human Jew. It was an amazing book, and I just have to... I was so taken with this book, and that he did this trip. The trek where he walked like 500 miles through Israel.
So there's a specific Israel trail that
yes.
you can hike.
Yes, like that other trail that we talked about in Spain.
Yeah, the pilgrims
it was like
hike.
That,
and we've got like the Appalachian Trail.
Yes.
And you and I heard there's a Sierra Nevada Trail and a Great Northwest Trail.
Uh-huh. And so he did this Israeli trail and camped out. He also had these, of course, talks about his adventures camping out there and meeting people. There was also like these trail angels that open their homes for people that do this trail. And here he was, 50 years old, with a 50-pound backpack, trying to do this trek where mostly, young people do that kind of stuff. But how he would think about his life and, as a husband and as a wife, as a husband and a father, and, his wife wanting a divorce after 28 years. And it kind of hit home because I got a divorce after 30 years. And here he is, 8 weeks on this trail, thinking about all these different things in his life and trying to make come to some peace, an understanding of what's happening and what he's going to do for the rest of his life. And it took him 8 weeks. Well, I'd like to drop him a note about what a giant impact this book had on me, but I'm sure not going to tell him how many years it took me to get some kind of a peace. And it sure was not 8 weeks. I am so amazed at this guy. And so he goes through all these, he goes through it like his whole life. Like when he was 12, the principal had come and given us talk and said, "Who are you?" And then, who are you? Then, who am I exactly, and where do I fit in this universe and everything? He comes through this whole thing through his Jewishness, and I come through peace through my Christian beliefs. And he had tried other religions and then went back to his own Jewish religion. And he wasn't very observant, but then he married a lady from Britain whose family was a lot more observant. And so he became more observant himself. I was just blown away by this book. I thought it was terrific. And how he not only solved all these problems, but had a plan for the rest of his life. It's a fantastic book for anybody who could use some help in dealing with their stuff. And he brought it down to like 5 different things. The humility, recognizing how little control we have of our lives and our situations. And in a way, it's kind of interesting that we're going through this COVID-19 problem. And how much control do we really have? A lot less than we think we have. And the acceptance of, what the world is like and not what we would like it to be. And to appreciate what you do have instead of what you don't have. And to forgive, that is a biggie. And of course, we all know we need to forgive, and it's
not always so easy.
No, are you kidding me? That is the hardest thing ever. But, so important. And the last one that he has was purpose, having a sense of meaning and direction in your life. I just loved this book. I thought this guy had a lot to say. I'm glad I read the book. I would like to drop him a note and say how much it meant to me.
I'm friends with him on Facebook. We'll write him and we'll tell him.
Yes.
Yeah, and I love this list that you wrote from the book. The 5 things we need. Number 1, humility. Number 2, acceptance. Number 3, appreciate what you do have. Number 4, forgiveness. And number 5, a purpose, having a sense of meaning and direction in your life. Wow.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
I know. It's just really terrific.
I should probably read that book.
You should.
I mean, I was going through my own divorce at the time, and we were it was a really special trip with you to be experiencing
Yes, it really was.
The Holy Land with my mother,
and so many wonderful memories. My goodness.
Yeah, and I wrote about our it's going to be the last chapter of my travel story book, our Israel experience, and so I didn't want to read his book and cloud my story with what he was going through. But now that I've got space and distance, and that you read the book,
Yes, it's time.
I could see someone else's. I can let someone else's
experiences.
divorce experience come into my
Well, I'm
my
just
brain.
so amazed at him that he could do this in 8 weeks and solve, get over the hurt and everything. Of course, I'm sure that afterwards he'd think of stuff, but, like come to a peace and understanding, that he had done a good job as a father and as a husband. And, they had a happy life. He was absolutely shocked that she wanted a divorce after 28 years. Well, where mine was not a happy marriage, so I didn't relate as that part of it. And but having been married longer than he had, of course he was happy and I wasn't. But there were so many things that touched my heart about this
Is there any advice on marriage or getting divorced that you could give to people
Well,
listening?
Well, like what he was saying, it takes two people, and she had already decided that she did not want to be married anymore. You can't just be married by yourself,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I tried many years, but
Yeah.
you can't.
I witnessed that.
It doesn't work, and it really hurts the children. So, if you can't come to an understanding that you should at least stay together for the children. Do you want the children to suffer? You have a responsibility to the children, and you also have a responsibility to each other. I'm sure that people go through stages where they're not that happy being married, but you committed. Are you committed or not? That's the bottom line.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's what I have to say about marriage and divorce. Yeah. Wow. That's,
It's I think it could be the best thing for people. We're not really supposed to be by yourself. That marriage could be an absolutely wonderful thing, and like having children could be an absolutely wonderful thing. But there's times when you just are not overjoyed. The kid screams all night long, and you got to get up and go to work or something. Whoa. And of course, when they're sick and everything, there's a lot of challenges. But I think it's worth it if you could both work it out. It takes two people.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I loved being married. I liked being part of a team. I liked
Yes.
Knowing that somebody had my back.
Yeah.
And I like having somebody to check in with all the time, and just to share the little small mundane details of life.
That's the
like
happy part.
like pretty things you see on the walk around the
Right,
neighborhood with your
right.
mom or things like that. So, I mean, it's a mystery what cosmic glue holds it together and what makes it fall apart. So the last thing we're going to talk about, so, I'm always going into used bookstores and keeping an eye out at flea markets and thrift stores. Laura, my beautiful sister, who is no longer with us, there was a book that she loved, and I found this a year ago. So I forget where I was, but I was in a used bookstore. It might have even been Lake Tahoe. And I didn't read this book, but you just read this book.
I read it for the second time. She gave me that book years ago.
Okay, so I
She
found
loved
it, and
that
I
book.
always remembered the title.
Yeah.
And I remembered it was a book that my sister loved, so, it was probably like $4 or $5, and I bought it. And the book is called When I Am an Old Woman, I Shall Wear Purple. That's the name of the book. When I Am an Old Woman, I Shall Wear Purple. And it's a collection of short stories, you were telling me. What can you tell me about this book?
Well, it's all from this poem. And why don't you read the poem?
Okay, and that, I always remembered the title.
Okay.
This is it.
Okay.
I remember the title because it always stuck in my head that why wait until you're old to wear purple or to do whatever you want.
Yeah, I think that's what Laura liked about that book.
Okay, so this is it. The name of the poem is called Warning by Jenny Joseph. When I am an old woman, I shall wear purple, with a red hat which doesn't go and doesn't suit me. And I shall spend my pension on brandy and summer gloves and satin sandals and say we've no money for butter. I shall sit down on the pavement when I'm tired and gobble up samples in shops and press alarm bells and run my stick along the public railings and make up for the sobriety of my youth. I shall go out in my slippers in the rain and pick the flowers in other people's gardens and learn to spit. You can wear terrible shirts and grow more fat and eat 3 pounds of sausages at a go, or only bread and pickle for a week, and hoard pens and pencils and beer mats and things in boxes. And now we must have clothes that keep us dry, and pay our rent and not swear in the street, but set a good example for the children. We must have friends to dinner and read the papers. But maybe I ought to practice a little now, so people who know me are not too shocked and surprised when suddenly I am old and start to wear purple. Nice.
It's a pretty cool book.
That's a pretty great poem. So, what do you remember of this book? What?
It's a collection of essays and poems and pictures of older people. And I thought it was well done.
You thought some of it was a little depressing, but
Well, I thought it was a little depressing looking at it from my angle. But it's not meant to be depressing.
But that the purple poem is uplifting advice,
There's a lot
like
of stuff.
R.E. Green's 5 points of getting over divorce. That's
Right.
good, and why wait until you're old to start being flamboyant and wear purple?
Yes.
Especially now with everybody got their hair grown out and people haven't been outside. I think
I definitely
people are
need
going
a
to start
haircut.
being really flamboyant when all this is over, don't you think?
Well, I think people should at least be looking at their lives and trying to say, okay, what is this all about? What is my life? Where's it going?
Why am I being conservative
Yeah,
and reserved in my appearance and actions? If you think people are going to have that kind of revelation?
I'm not sure. I think it's different for everybody. It depends on where you are in life.
Yeah. Well, we're coming to the end of our of this week's quarantine lockdown Mommy and Tommy show, and I'm very happy because you were going to go back to Orlando the first week of June, but now
I'm rethinking it.
I'm trying to pressure you to
I know.
stay a little longer because, quite frankly, I'm not ready for you to go, and I'm going to be so sad and lonely when you leave me. So
Well, it's hard.
Don't leave me, Bobby. Don't leave me.
Jeez.
Yeah,
Well,
I'll get R.E. Green to sign you your own copy of my Israel
I
trip.
think I need this book by myself.
So in closing, are there any other happy thoughts you'd like to share with people and
No.
lift them up in whatever their experience might be right now?
Well, I hope that they're able to go outside and enjoy the sunlight and enjoy the little things in life
Yeah.
and not worry so much about what they can't change.
And if you're playing Scrabble with your mom, she played a word on me the other day, VOG, V-O-G.
It's a word.
And I called her on it, and it's a damn word.
Yes, it is.
And you're...
But you still won. You still won. But I'm giving you a run for your money.
Yeah, and you've learned all the strategies, and you're not a pushover. We're neck and neck fighting it out for.
It's good not to be a pushover.
The virus lockdown Scrabble championship.
Yeah, we play most every day, so we're getting better.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Mommy. Well, I love you very much. I wouldn't want to be experiencing this historic pandemic with anyone else but you.
Well, I'm glad that you are having such a good time that you'd like me to continue. You know, it's hard,
Well, I know you want to get home, but again, we're in no hurry to put you on a plane until we see, and we were talking about that on our walk today. How come there's not more updates on, like, Florida's opened? Okay,
what happened?
Is there a big surge there?
Yeah.
People are flying. Are people getting sick on planes?
I
Like,
don't-
it seems like the news isn't giving us
What we need.
the news that would help us in our life and how we can make
decisions.
plans. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the news people have let us down. Sorry. Whoever you are. that might
I
be
think
into the
everybody would
news.
agree with you there.
Well.
So it's I'm not ready to trust putting you on a plane, and I would be happy to use that as an excuse to.
Well, we still have a few days to.
We still
think
got
about
time.
it. Yeah.
So, and I can't wait to dive back into that country music documentary
it's really
tonight.
great. It's really great.
Okay. Well, everybody, I hope you're safe and happy and keeping mentally strong through all of this. Hopefully you got your purple and your red hat all picked out, and that you're happy and surrounded with people you love. So thanks for listening to my program. Should we sing that song one more time?
What?
I'd rather drink muddy water and sleep in a hollow log. I'd rather drink muddy water and sleep in a hollow log than to stay in Atlanta, treated like a dirty dog. Well, it's T for Texas, T for Tennessee. T for Texas, T for Tennessee. T for Thelma, the girl who made a fool out of me. Shalom, amigos, amigas, and long may you run, wherever you're running to, once we're allowed to run again. I love you, Mommy.
Love you too, Tommy.
Tom Rhodes, you're a funny man. Tom Rhodes, you're an international comedian. Tom Rhodes, karate kick, baby, oh yeah. Tom Rhodes, you're a groovy dude. You go all around the world, telling jokes to all of the people. You are an international comedian. You're funny to everybody in every single country in the world. Tom Rhodes, I like you very much. I think you're talented and very wonderful. Tom Rhodes, you're the best guy in the world. I wanna be your friend, you should call me sometime. Here is my phone number, 603-644-0048. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Tom Rhodes, you're an international comedic sensation. Tom Rhodes, I like to listen to your podcast. Tom Rhodes, you're the best man to ever walk on the earth.